Broncos, I think, are emerging as the top threat to the Chiefs. All right, welcome in. It's the Breer Report for June the 17th. We are into the dead period in the NFL calendar. Annually, this is when the NFL goes on vacation. Now, there are a few teams that are going through their mandatory mini camps over this Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But for the most part, the league has gone on vacation. And again, the end of June, beginning of July, barring things happening with players off the field, this is the quiet time. So what I thought we'd do this week is go over a few things that we had in my MMQB takeaways column that I think we're going to be talking about over the course of the summer. The first thing involves the Dallas Cowboys. And because this past weekend was Father's Day, I reached out and talked to Brian Schottenheimer about the influence his own dad had on him. And one of the things that I was able to come away with in my conversation with Shotty, who I've known for a long time, was how his dad had an impact on the culture that he's building in Dallas, and how I think that's sort of what makes him a good fit for where the Cowboys are. This, of course, was a criticized hire coming out of the Mike McCarthy era. There were a lot of people who felt like, why would you hire a non-play calling offensive coordinator who's in his 50s as the head coach? And I could tell you a number of reasons why I think that this is a good hire, a sensible hire. This is a team that won 12 games 3 years in a row, so I don't think there's a need to upset the apple cart. I think Shotty's been through a lot, too, that prepares him for this job. He, of course, was one of the hot young names 15 years ago. He became a coordinator in his 30s. He was up for jobs in 2011 and 2012, and his name was in that mix. And then he hit a rut in his career and wound up being fired in New York. As Rex Ryan was trying to save his own job, spent some time with the Jeff Fisher Rams, went back and coached at the University of Georgia for a year, wound up working with Russell Wilson out in Seattle. So this is a guy who at one point was the hot young offensive assistant, and a guy who now has a decade of experience after that. And he didn't get the job when a lot of other guys have gotten the job. And so I think that that'll help him in this experience, becoming a head coach for the first time. But really what we drilled down on in talking to him over the weekend was the culture that he's looking to build. And that has, that there's a lot of connection there to stuff that he learned from his dad, Marty, who of course was a head coach with 4 different franchises in the NFL, was the head coach of the Browns, the Chiefs, the Chargers, and at the time, the Redskins. And what Shotty really focused on was his dad's time with the Chiefs. And around his office, he's got pictures. He's got pictures of his dad with the Chiefs quarterbacks. At one point, that was Joe Montana and Steve Bono. He's got a picture of his dad with Derek Thomas, who was a little bit of a harder player to reach at the time. And, of course, they're tributes to his dad, but they're also a reminder to him of what he's trying to build and how much of it has to do not with X's and O's, but of the people that are coming into his building and how he can bring them together. And I think when you're in a pressure cooker like Dallas, when you're in a unique situation working for Jerry Jones, having an idea of what it's supposed to look like from a cultural standpoint is a huge piece of the puzzle. And the impact I think that he's starting to build out there really, to me, comes back to maybe the biggest unfinished piece of business that the Cowboys have to do over the rest of the summer, and that is the Micah Parsons situation. This could have gone off the rails in a lot of different ways. Last year, he was eligible for a deal, didn't get one. They didn't get it done earlier in the offseason. There was stuff where Jerry Jones said he'd never heard of Micah Parsons' agent. It was David Mulughetto, one of the most prominent agents in football. This thing could have gone sideways a million different ways. They got a new defensive coordinator, Matt Eberflus, coming in. And I think that Brian Schottenheimer was able to keep Micah Parsons on board and keep him in a position where he showed up last week for the team's mandatory mini camp. And you haven't heard a lot from Micah himself on the contract situation, on his relationship with the Cowboys being in a certain spot. You haven't heard any of that. I think it is a good sign for where Brian Schottenheimer has things right now. Does that mean that they're going to get a contract done before training camp? No. Does that mean that Micah Parsons is going to show up for training camp? No. But I do think his ability to manage that situation effectively is a good sign for where he has the culture and a good indication of where he's trying to take the culture there. So, again, I think on Father's Day, he wanted to honor his dad, and rightfully so. Marty Schottenheimer accomplished a lot. He's been gone for 4 years now, but accomplished a lot as an NFL coach. And obviously Brian is thinking a lot about him. But I do think, beyond just that, there was the piece of his dad that lives on now and how he's trying to build things in Dallas. And I think those things are what makes him a fit for what the challenge is in building out your own culture in Dallas that isn't just about the star or about who owns the team. All right, our second topic for this week, another one that I think we're going to be talking about a lot over the first few weeks of training camp at the very least, and that's J.J. McCarthy taking over in Minnesota. We've been through all this over the course of the offseason. They tried to bring Sam Darnold back on what would have been essentially a one-year deal. They tried to bring Daniel Jones back as a $15 million insurance policy. They at least had conversations with Aaron Rodgers. And I do think, as we've gone through all of this, I think some people have missed the forest for the trees. And so I wanted to kind of give you the big picture of where the Vikings are going and what they're looking at here with J.J. McCarthy as their starting quarterback, and how this really was the part of a bigger plan that Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah put into motion when they arrived there in 2022. They inherited a good team. That team won 13 games their first year in charge. They had a lot of proud veterans on that team, but the team did need to get younger. The cap situation needed to be cleaned up. And effectively, they've done that. And the idea was eventually in time to find a long-term answer at quarterback that not only would give them the security of that position that everybody is looking for, but also would give them a period of time where they have financial flexibility and be able to aggressively build out the team. And that is why the idea of bringing back Darnold or Jones was only a one-year thing. And that's why they wind up walking away from Aaron Rodgers when they did. And really, to me, what that came down to was we don't want to press pause on the J.J. McCarthy era. With Darnold or Jones, they would have been pushing McCarthy. I think Darnold probably would have had a really good chance to win that job, but they wouldn't have been sort of taking McCarthy out of the equation and saying, okay, get ready for year three, like they would have been with Rodgers. That's the real indicator there, is they want McCarthy, and they have wanted McCarthy to evolve into their starting quarterback in 2025. It's what they had planned for in 2024. And from a big picture standpoint, this is right where they wanted to be able to start to build aggressively around a young quarterback. So how has that helped them? Well, if you look at it over the course of the last couple of years, they've been able to get younger, and they also have been aggressive on the veteran market. They took a flyer on Byron Murphy at corner. They re-signed him this offseason. They bring in, to replace Danielle Hunter, both Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, who've been really good signings. And then this offseason, they've been able to add aggressively to their offensive line and adding Will Fries and Ryan Kelly from Indianapolis, and their defensive line and Jonathan Allen. They've gotten bigger and stronger, which was the whole idea, which is going back on when things went wrong against the Rams. And the idea from there is that when you've got a young quarterback with some ability, you'll be able to be really good around him, which is the whole idea here. They want to be good around J.J. McCarthy. And obviously, part of that plan was to have the quarterback rolling going into year two. McCarthy hit some pretty significant bumps in year one with, of course, the 2 knee surgeries, the second one being more of a cleanup, but also the weight loss and also some of the emotional ups and downs that you go through when you're a rookie and you're not able to be out there in the field. They do feel like over the course of the last couple of months that he's bounced back nicely. And so I think that's the thing about where the Vikings are right now. This is according to plan. And to me, this is about J.J. McCarthy now just going out and playing quarterback. You don't need to be a savior. You don't need to be Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow or Josh Allen. Just go out and play quarterback. I think what they have around him now with, again, that offensive line with Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill and now Will Fries and Ryan Kelly coming over from Indianapolis and Donovan Jackson there, and you're throwing to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, and you've got Aaron Jones, who's another product of that aggressive build behind you at running back. Just go out and play quarterback, JJ. That's all they're asking to do. Finally, our third takeaway, and this is another thing that I think has been a little overlooked over the course of the offseason, but how the Denver Broncos are coming out of the 2024 season and how after swallowing what they had to swallow and walking away from Russell Wilson and admitting the mistake that they made in Russell Wilson and now going into Sean Payton's third year as the head coach, they're really set up to be pretty good. And you can go on our pod, our AFC West pod from last week to get a little bit more. Connor and I are going through division by division, realistic expectations for every team. But I feel like this is a team that has a chance to level up a little bit this year. The reason why, on defense, so many ascending pieces. And really, like, you look at the young edge rushers, Nick Benito and Jonathan Cooper, the young corners with Patrick Surtain II, with Riley Moss, now Jedi their first round pick coming aboard. And they've added some real strength in the middle of the defense too, in bringing in Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga from San Francisco. I think that could be the best defense in the league with Vance Joseph still there. And if Bo Nix takes another step, you got Sean Payton calling the offense. The offensive line has evolved into a strength again. The Denver Broncos, I think, are emerging as the top threat to the Kansas City Chiefs. All apologies to the Chargers. I think the Chargers are going to be good too. But the Broncos, I think, are emerging as the top threat to the Chiefs in the AFC West. Should be an interesting race because, again, like another thing I mentioned in that MMQB takeaways column, which I suggest that you go read, is I think the Chiefs have a chance to be better than next year. I think the AFC West be better than they were last year. I think the AFC West is going to be dynamite, top to bottom. Appreciate you guys coming out. I'm going to put the call out for questions here on Twitter a little later today. Be sure to get your questions in. We'll have a mailbag edition coming for you tomorrow. And then we'll have a couple more shows next week before I personally go on vacation. Appreciate you guys coming out. We'll see you tomorrow.